Good morning. It is Thursday, March 18th. It's 9:01 a.m. This is the first half session of Senate Natural Resources and Energy morning session for the day. We are turning first this morning to S109, our weatherization bill. And one of the components of that bill is exploring, or actually following up on earlier discussions around possibilities on innovative funding. And by that, we're talking about implementing energy savings measures in homes, including weatherization, by using on-bill financing methods as well as to-the-meter financing methods. The proposed allocation currently sets aside $2 million to be allocated to support such measures, including possibly to-the-meter. But we also want to make sure that that offer is something that utilities are interested in. We talked about this maybe 6 weeks ago. There's been, I know, ongoing conversations outside of committee about the possibilities of working in this way. So since some of those conversations have matured, we wanted to check back in with folks and hear what they had to say about their interest in such work and how we might think about either being more specific or changing the guidance that's built into the allocation to make it more useful to them to actually take up such an innovative billing technique or funding technique. So that's what we're checking back in with folks that have all been here before on this topic to see if what they have to say today. And with that, good morning, Senator Campion. With that, I'd like to turn first to Melissa Bailey.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. Again, Melissa Bailey, Manager of Government and Member Relations for Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. We're a joint action agency comprised of 11 of the municipal electric utilities in Vermont. And in addition to providing power supply and other services to the members, VEPSA manages the municipal's Tier 3 portfolio offerings under the Renewable Energy Standard. And so in that context, we've been engaged in exploring potential for on-bill financing and specifically to-the-meter repayment for financing energy projects and weatherization specifically. We see on-bill financing as kind of supporting the Tier 3 offerings. Our Tier 3 focus is largely on cold climate heat pumps, and weatherization is an important complement to that technology deployment. In addition, just this year, VEPSA and Efficiency Vermont have been engaged in offering what we're calling tailored efficiency efforts in 3 of our member communities, 3 of the utility service territories. And that's an effort where Efficiency Vermont and the utility and VEPSA are all getting together and offering more customized services in response to needs of those communities. So I just mentioned these efforts. These are kind of this has been the impetus for us to look more broadly at financing mechanisms to support kind of what the utility is already doing around weatherization and around Tier 3 services. So in our Tier 3 offerings, I will mention VEPSA sees kind of overall observes a tension between spending electric ratepayer money actually on weatherization and the desire to support customers who have identified weatherization and thermal efficiency as a clear need. So that's kind of the line we try to walk, is avoiding actually spending ratepayer dollars directly on weatherization, because that does create a cost shift among customers, and recognizing that this is a need that customers have and have articulated, and that there is kind of a gap in the service offerings in Vermont to kind of support weatherization more broadly. I don't have slides today. I think I will share my my screen if that is okay. Just so
Sure.
that I'm constantly looking away from you all. Oops. All right. It looks like that's disabled. That's fine. I can go on this way.
Jude can There you go.
I just sent it to you, Melissa. Sorry, I wasn't expecting that. Okay.
No problem. I did not give you a heads up in advance.
No, it's okay. Do you see your co-host ability? Yeah, you're good.
I think so. Is it up now?
Yes.
Right now.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. So just wanted to talk a little bit about how we see to the meter tariffs, making sure that we're all on the same page about kind of what that terminology means. It does get a little bit confusing with on-bill and to the meter, and I want to make sure that that distinction is clear. So the unique characteristics that we see of to the meter tariffs, which I think we're exploring here, are that they are revenue neutral or cash flow positive for customers. So that means that the savings from the energy investment exceed the repayment amount that the customer is responsible for on an ongoing basis. And typically the programs we've seen actually provide a guarantee of those energy savings. So it's more than an estimate that you individual household are going to save $40 a month on your fuel bill. There's actually a guarantee mechanism that those savings will materialize for the customer. And
Ms. Bailey, so, one of the things I realize when I'm talking to people about this too, because it is sometimes confusing, is that it's total energy savings. Some people wonder how you could possibly be using more electricity and save money by doing that. Anyway, so I'm just tossing that in because I hear people getting caught up in that distinction between energy, your electric bill and total energy.
And I think that's a really important point, that this is a holistic look at the household's energy expenses, as you said, and there most likely will be measures that may reduce fossil fuel usage and also increase electric usage at once. So the concept there is to make the customer whole essentially over all of their energy sources and energy uses in the house. There are some complexities there that we've been looking at around because fossil fuel use in Vermont is unregulated. There are some complexities there. They're not insurmountable, but there is a need for a contractor or a service provider going into the home to get a clear picture of what the actual energy use across all fuels is. It's not quite as simple as with the electric bill where you have a regulated entity and there's a clear demonstrated history of those costs. So it's a good point. Another attribute of to the meter tariffs is that it's just pure convenience. It offers an easy mechanism for repayment for the customer. They don't need to worry about another check or another loan payment on top of other household expenses in the month. It's conveniently there on the electric bill. And again, that electric bill is may go up, but you would see a commensurate reduction in other household bills. Another, I think, a key benefit of to the meter financing is that it makes weatherization more accessible to renters. This has been a hard to reach clientele. I think traditionally there is what they refer to as the split incentive, when a landlord may not have an incentive to invest in energy efficiency projects or weatherization in a home if the renter or the tenant is the one who's actually paying the bill. So by having to the meter financing, you allow the person who is living in the residence and benefiting from the energy savings is the one who's also paying for the investment over time on that electric bill. Just some kind of broader benefits. Those are the specific customer benefits. And again, we see to the meter financing as an extremely attractive option from the customer end. I think in order to get to that very attractive offering, there is a lot of legwork and a lot of administrative coordination that needs to happen behind the scenes. But the result is a product that I think that residents find it tempting to participate when this service is offered. At least that's what we have learned in our research, is where to the meter financing is offered with these guarantees and the attribute of being revenue neutral. There's extremely high uptake for customers. When a project is put before a household and they're guaranteed to at least be as well off as they are now and have some efficiency upgrades, people are likely to take advantage of that. These probably go without saying, but I'm calling them out here, but benefits for Vermont, we see this as having the potential to accelerate the pace of weatherization and specifically coupled with incentives. There are some questions around why haven't utilities already done this? Why don't we already have this mechanism if it is so attractive? And I think that the key piece in VEPS's perspective is there will be uptake if financing is coupled with incentives. You can't necessarily have one without the other. And it sounds like this session, there is the potential for some significant investment to go to customers to buy down the upfront cost of these weatherization projects. Why, to the meter financing? I mean, we're talking about weatherization, right? We're talking about fossil fuel reductions. We're not necessarily talking about the electric space. So why do you rely on the electric utility? I think one of the other benefits of to the meter financing is that it essentially leverages that utility customer relationship to the extent there's trust in the utility and it's a known entity. Having utilities involved in these programs and promoting these programs kind of leverages that trust that the customer has. And for the utility, we see that these will likely increase the adoption of our Tier 3 projects. And again, Tier 3 projects have the intent of reducing fossil fuel use around the state. So this could essentially be a tool to accelerate Tier 3 deployment. I just want to briefly touch on kind of the utility considerations that we think need to be explored as we look forward.
Ms. Bailey, can I ask a question before we go on to the next section? So the first bullet in benefits for Vermont coupled with incentives, can you say a little more about the types of incentives? I think part of what, the PAYS model talks about an 80-20 split. So if you're saving $100, 80 of it would go back to paying the loan and 20 would stay in your pocket. So that's the attraction. You came out ahead. But we also heard that there are technologies worth deploying that won't get deployed because you won't be able to achieve that kind of 80-20 split. Or so is when you talk about incentives, are you talking about contributions to the cost of doing the weatherization, for instance, that would then allow that project to achieve those kind of revenue neutral or even a positive cash flow? Because you basically just bought down the cost and you make that 80-20 split more achievable. Is that what's
I think that's exactly it. My understanding of the 80-20 split is the ideal is the customer has a little extra money in their pocket, but that 20% also is kind of a buffer in case the energy savings don't materialize. But the customer is guaranteed they will never pay more going forward. And yes, I think you kind of hit on the issue. The goal is comprehensive efficiency projects, comprehensive weatherization jobs, and those typically oftentimes would not screen under this 80-20 criteria. They wouldn't even be necessarily revenue neutral, just that what we've heard in our exploration is that the upfront cost just doesn't generate those savings. And this gets back to why hasn't this been implemented in Vermont yet? It's that cost effectiveness barrier. So yes, when I say incentives, I'm talking about an upfront lump sum payment that essentially buys down the cost of the project. So instead of say $10,000, I think comprehensive weatherization projects cost $8,000 to $10,000. And it's very, very hard to get those savings back over a 10-year period of time just through energy savings. So there is this need to upfront dollars to buy down that cost so that instead of financing $10,000, you're at $6,000 or $7,000.
Okay. And so I don't know if you've looked into it enough, if you could say, we often talk about trying to make sure we're getting at least the low hanging fruit, but what are the kinds of measures that might be higher hanging, like they're worth doing, but they're also, there's a less, the return is slower on them?
What we've heard in our conversations is that really is comprehensive weatherization and air sealing, that there are some kind of low-hanging fruit measures in that category, but to actually do a deep retrofit, I think that it was characterized to me as the quality of work that the weatherization assistance programs do when they do a comprehensive weatherization job, that would not screen without some additional funding. So we're talking about the deep tightening of the shell, I think is
Yep.
that typically would not screen, whereas I think something like a heat pump potentially could screen more easily, more readily, but we don't want necessarily, I think that the policy goal here is really to go after the full deep retrofit work.
Right. Great. Right. Yeah, I think it's our a theme in the committee is let's just not heat the great outdoors more efficiently. Right. So, all right. Thank you.
Sure. And I think that just speaks to the customer economics of if these projects simply paid for themselves, customers probably would be doing them on their own. So from the utility perspective, which of course is the lens that we look at these programs through, there are concerns about who ultimately holds the debt or the obligation for repayment. As we have explored the PAYS model, we find it very attractive. We think it's a promising model. There is a lingering concern that the utility essentially under that model holds the debt. The utility is making the investment and is on the hook for ultimate repayment. I think that there are ways to mitigate that risk to the utility, and we would be looking to build those into any program design. A potential way to mitigate that risk is kind of a loan loss reserve if there is non-payment. We have heard from service providers that we've spoken with that have actually implemented PAYS or on the bill or on to the meter financing, that the risk of repayment is extremely low. And still, I think to offer that confidence to utilities, we do need to think about designing a program that limits that risk. Essentially, the VEPSA members' concern is always what costs might ultimately be borne by ratepayers as a whole.
Right. One thought just to share it while we're going by that point is, we're talking about could we appropriate money that would be helpful to such a project, and especially for the smaller utilities in the state. One thought is, might that money help stand up something like a loan loss reserve fund? Might it help work with utility or another service provider, in essence, to do the upfront investment in creating sort of a turnkey solution for utilities to sign up for, so that rather than asking the 16 non-IOU utilities and perhaps GMP as well to all figure it out on their own, might there be a common resource that could be shared? And it's probably the least attractive piece of the project to anyone because it's just overhead. It's not actually providing the benefit that you'd actually like to deliver. So I'll just put that on the table for a moment, and maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah, thanks. And we appreciate that consideration. We don't like to come into committee and say, oh, well, overhead and administrative costs are going to preclude participation. We try to avoid doing that, and it is a very real factor. And again, to the extent that the utility takes on those overhead costs, those essentially get passed on to other ratepayers. So there is an equity concern there. So we see that as a strength of the S109 proposal. Currently, I don't know that worth the end goal, but covering
Ms.
those.
Bailey, you just froze for maybe 10 seconds. Could you, sorry, that's okay. But if you were saying something and we all leaned forward to hear it, and then you were gone. So if you could back up 15 seconds and say it again, that'd be great.
Well, that's interesting. I did get that nasty note that my internet connection is unstable here in Montpelier. I apologize. I think I was just saying that I appreciate the acknowledgement that there are administrative costs. We hate to have those be a barrier to offering, a useful service. And I think just having that funding allocated in S109 and the recognition that those are real costs for the utility that we don't want to pass on to ratepayers as a whole is an important consideration. I think that was the gist of what I was
okay.
saying.
Thank you.
Sure. And again, just one more point on the utility consideration. We do think this should be optional for utilities to opt in. I think that a statewide offering does make a lot of sense. I think we're open to all options in terms of, do we go with an existing package offered through a contractor provider, or do we try to stand up a program specifically in Vermont? I think we're leaning towards, right now, I think our current thinking would be leaning towards a prepackaged service that has already been delivered, and some of these barriers have been worked through, but we're certainly not closed to considering other alternatives. Regardless, we do think it should be optional for utilities to participate in this type of tariff offering and have some latitude to design the tariff to best meet their customers' needs.
Right. Would VIPSA ever act, I don't know if you do, on behalf of all your member utilities, so that the package would basically be designed that any VIPSA member would get it? That, do you pool resources that way?
We try to put, yeah, that's one of the primary, purposes of VEPSA, and we do pool resources whenever possible. And I've thought about that, could VEPSA step in and act as the intermediary and essentially eliminate utility involvement? Of course, in this instance, I don't think that could work well, because ultimately you really are relying on the utility bill. And at this point, VEPSA does not have any role in billing. But in terms of designing the service or coming up with a common tariff, VEPSA does do the rate making for the member utilities. We certainly could explore a common offering for all 11 members.
Okay, thank you.
The ultimate back office administration still would have to lie with the utility, as far as I can see, because they are the ones interacting with the customer and collecting monthly electric bill payment. So,
and have you had conversations with utility or another back office provider for to the meter work to get a sense of the cost and expense of that service?
We've had a few conversations with the utility, and again, I see that as a really promising opportunity. I know you took testimony from them last week. We have not yet been able to pin down exactly what the costs would look like. I think startup costs, I think it would be safe to say they're in the hundreds of thousands, not millions. But we really haven't gotten a good refinement of that. And part of that, I think part of that ambiguity centers around, we'd be looking to kind of design a program, again, statewide, and leveraging the existence of Efficiency Vermont here in the state, in which is a positive that may potentially drive down those costs. E-Utilities model, I think, is to hire staff on the ground and come into a state, and essentially, there are costs associated with actually having a personnel presence in the state, and we're looking at ways to potentially avoid those, again, by leveraging Efficiency Vermont's participation. So that was a long answer. The question is, no, we don't have a firm handle on
Right.
costs. We're hoping to get that in the next few weeks as we move forward.
Right. Well, thank you. I mean, to me, it's actually encouraging how much has happened in the last 6 weeks.
It does feel like this has been moving along pretty quickly. So the last, I don't have much else to say. I did just, the strengths from S109. Again, the potential for robust incentives and financing tools together, I think is the key to actually making weatherization projects happen. Of course, the committee is aware of the workforce issues as well. So that would kind of be a third leg on the stool. And, the structure where funding is actually provided for utilities to implement these to the meter tariffs avoids that cost shifting, which is always a concern to the VEPSA members, and avoids rate pressure in the electric sector, which we want to avoid for numerous reasons. So we see the bill as positive, and happy to answer any other questions.
Let me take a look, see if there are any questions from the rest. Thank you for that. Any other committee questions for Ms. Bailey? I do have one, and that's, we've talked about the 3 legs on this stool. Somehow all stools seem to have 3 legs here. There's funding, weatherization, and then the outreach and counseling piece, so that we actually connect well with the customer and walk them through the whole process so that it's a successful experience. On that last piece, have you given some thought to, would the utility provide that? Would you be partnering on the low income part of your portfolio with the OEOs and community action agencies, and for the moderate and middle income folks, would EVT be delivering those people, or do you think that it would be utility staff? How are you thinking about that one?
Sure. In terms of communication and outreach, I think it would be all of the above. Utilities do have the benefit that more so than other mail, our bills do get read to the extent people still get paper bills. Those have a high open rate, and so information that comes from the utility is likely to make it to the customer. In our tailored efforts, again, that's new this year, but we're working intensely with EVT in Ludlow, Jacksonville, and Barton. And so there's potential for joint marketing between the two entities. And we've also involved the Heat Squad in those conversations, which tends to target the moderate income folks. We have not to date worked very closely with the weatherization assistance programs and OEO. But again, that concern has been, I think what we've heard kind of anecdotally is don't market weatherization. The waiting list is too long. They don't need any more marketing. They don't need more customers coming to the door. But I think the answer to your question is, it would be all of the above. We would envision joint marketing, joint outreach. Utilities, especially these small utilities, know their customers fairly well. And I think there would be, community grassroots outreach, as well as, more traditional bill stuffers and other, web presence.
Yeah, it would seem to me, because the to the meter especially is a pretty novel concept. I would think for a lot of folks, when they first hear it, they go, well, wait, this sounds too good to be true. So really clear, consistent messaging throughout the state would seem like it'd be very helpful for people to get beyond the novelty of it and really understand it and trust it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that trust piece is key. We have a great communications person. I know that EVT has a great marketing team. And I think that, to the extent that the message can come from one of those entities rather than potentially an out-of-state entity like e-utility, that will kind of give us a leg up in getting customers to take it seriously. And like you said, to get at the trust issue of, is this too good to be true or not?
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. As always, you come well equipped to speak with us. Any committee questions before we go on? All right. Thanks, Ms. Bailey. Then I'd like to invite next Mr. Poor from the department. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. TJ Poor from the Department of Public Service. Good to see you all again. So I just am going to talk about a little bit the different types of on-bill financing, because I think we often are conflating on-bill financing into the meter financing. And my plan today is to really just talk about some of the benefits and the concerns with potential pieces of that model if it were to be the distribution utility that is kind of in the pivot point here of providing the service on the bill. And hopefully that's helpful. I didn't have a chance to connect to focus on what exactly you wanted to hear today. So.
Right. That is helpful because I think you're right. They get conflated and confused. And so we want to disentangle them and get the lay of the land straight. And then also, in a certain way, to take a certain amount of pressure off everyone here today. We're not trying to figure this out today for the bill for good. It's just that we keep on learning more about it and we're refining our thinking. So thank you. You'll help us keep moving.
Right. Thanks. And I will also, you reference the funds that are directed to the department to support this. I want to speak for a moment, maybe at the end, about how that relates to what my understanding of what VHFA is planning on doing now. So
okay, thank you.
So generally, there's the two types of on-bill financing, and I think the language is really important. There's this on-bill loan product for that, where that puts the utility in the position of actually financing the project, right? And so that is the utility puts up the capital either from shareholders or otherwise, and is paid back for that. And it could also even be funding from another source is put up, and the utility is then the loan agent and essentially making the loan to the customer. And that kind of arrangement, we just need to be really careful. There's a lot of flags, I think, red flags with that. A lot of these could be solved, but I just want to point out some of the concerns. And I think Ms. Bailey talked about some of them in terms of risks to other ratepayers of non-payment. We don't want other ratepayers to be in the position of kind of backing or providing that. You mentioned a loan loss reserve, but putting up that money on their own, or we don't want the interest rate to have to go up to cover that kind of thing. Even stepping back from that, I guess, we'll mention that the utility business model isn't to be a lender. So we got to, be careful about putting them in a position to doing something that they're not good at. I want to flag the truth in lending type concerns. If there's a loan going through the utility or to a customer or to a meter, that we need to make sure that the customer is well aware of the obligations that are coming. There's the issue of disconnects. So Ms. Bailey also mentioned this. Where in the pecking order does the loan come? And does the utility bill get paid first, and then this loan obligation, and can a utility disconnect for non-payment of the latter portion there? This is something the department's really concerned about, in talking with my consumer affairs division this week, that we wouldn't want to be in a situation where we're having a customer take on an obligation where then they are being disconnected from service. And again, loan loss reserves or other methods could help that, but I just want to flag some of these. And then if the utility is in the position of making the loan, their rate of return is, especially right now where interest rates are low, is often it's higher than other sources of financing. So we want to make sure that we're keeping the costs down. And frankly, we want programs that customers are going to participate in, because of all those concerns. That on-bill kind of paradigm, the on-bill financing where the utility is a lender, is really not going to, but it's not likely, in our opinion, to get a lot of uptake.
Right.
And so I wanted to put that context out there, and then talk about what I think is really the focus here, is the to-the-meter financing. So it's attached to the meter. There's no underwriting necessary for the customer. There's no debt obligation taken on by the customer itself. So this, in my mind, is more promising, but we need to work on more details as you're talking about. But this really puts the utility in the position of being the administrative tool. So the loans to the meter, a lender, it puts up the capital, and then it's recouped just through the meter. So just a line item on the bill, like the efficiency charge or taxes. It should be relatively simple to administer, but not to say that there aren't administration costs. Those should be covered, so that other ratepayers aren't paying for this. And it really, that takes the ratepayer risk and the utility business model concerns off the table, I think. There's as I mentioned, we wouldn't want any risk of disconnection for this to the meter piece. that's something that the department has is advocated against in previous iterations of this that have been tried in Vermont. And that means there needs to be some sort of loss reserve or interruption reserve. Even if somebody moves from their apartment and there's a vacant apartment for 2 months, then who's paying that bill? There's still kind of a gap there. There still is, things to be worked out, like how to deal with the meter debt if, the transfer of the meter debt to a new customer. So if somebody moves, that new customer is coming in, it's a great advantage of it. A renter could be weatherized, but not have the debt hanging over. But it's also not really well understood yet how that new customer would be informed of the obligation or of, a new potential payment of $200 a month. And so I think those are a lot of details that would need to be worked out. I'll throw this out there because I think it's been a question that's been asked before, is that there isn't really new authority that's needed to have the to the meter type financing available and to use the customer to use the bill as this administrative tool. I think Mr. Castonguay could talk to this a little bit, but GMP already has a tariff available that allows third-party lenders to use the bill for financing, and they're kind of just this administrative tool. As of now, it's unused. Lenders haven't been interested in using it, but that type of mechanism. My point in bringing it up is to say it's allowed. There's actually even a tariff in place. I'm not, it may need to be modified for whatever version of to the meter financing pilot comes out of all the work that we've been doing, but that it is authorized now.
So just to make sure I understand the distinction, you're saying there's no new need for statutory authority. There would need to be authority in the form of filing a tariff that included that feature.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
So, I think that's the distinction I wanted to draw is really where the utility of the on-bill loan financing product, with the utility in the kind of lender role or playing a large role versus the to the meter where somebody else is playing that lending role who has all the expertise and knowledge and skill set to actually be that lender. I think the costs go down, and the uptake could actually go up. I do want to comment on the using a third party. I think I shy away from a third party model, and this may be just my personal opinion here, but I shy away on the third party model because, well, one, there isn't much of a margin on these projects. In order to buy down the project to a spot where the payment is kind of revenue neutral, adding another party to the mix who needs to take a cut is going to just narrow those margins even further and make it more challenging. I think we've already also had experience in the state with having a third party run a program, not directly related to financing, but if you think about, you may remember a few years ago when OPower came in and ran a program for Efficiency Vermont. Everybody got a letter in the mail that compared their usage to neighbors. And I think there's a lot of challenges with a entity kind of applying their prepackaged program to Vermont. And I normally don't like to claim Vermont's uniqueness and say that, oh, we have to do it differently. But in this case, because we're so small, the unique features of Vermont are a lot different than if a big organization is used to doing this for a utility that has 1 million customers. And so I just get concerned about that. And it's not a deal breaker necessarily, but I do want to draw that parallel. Before I get into the what I think VHFA might be doing now and the $2 million allocation, I want to stop there and see if there's any questions on what I've said so far.
Any committee questions? I do have one. So I remember the O-Power letters didn't go over well, in part because people, I think, felt their privacy was invaded in some way. Like why you come, even though I don't think that actually happened, it just gave a weird feeling to people about someone looking at their usage compared to neighbors. My sense was that there was research behind it, that it was going to motivate people to compete a little bit and try to do better. But I don't know how I did notice the program went away. And that's still, it was branded, right? So you could tell it wasn't just Efficiency Vermont. If a third party operated sort of with in a brandless way, like they were just technology behind the scenes. So I'm not disagreeing in any way. I think it's a good point. We are small and they prefer, I suppose, to work with people they already know. And is it the branding piece and the sort of intrusion that's the worrisome part, and could that be solved by having someone provide the service as a back office piece to the utilities?
It's possible. I think it depends on how many restrictions are on the program. I think on the O-Power piece, some of that may have been able to be solved, except that in order to get started, they needed to have just start with 200,000 people or whatever the number was, and it was like the whole state was the pilot, and so there wasn't the opportunity to test out things in a smaller sample and move forward. And so I think it does depend on the structure, the third party itself. There's certainly third party vendors that have come in and provided great services in Vermont. So I just on a large scale, I get concerned about the cost and the restrictions that may be put in.
Sure. On the other hand, I could talk myself into thinking about it the other way. Like if we offered a turnkey solution to every utility in the state, that the cost per unit might drop, might be a very cost effective way to provide the service. So I'm not pitching it one way or the other. I'm just curious about what further research will show us.
Right. And I do think that there's the opportunity for that. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a third party that does it. And I'll use this as a pivot to talk about the other pieces here. Is that so? My understanding now is that the VHFA is considering doing a pilot with to the meter financing, and that the allocation that to VHFA would really go towards this purpose. And so that creates two things. Well, one, what does that mean? And then what does it mean for the $2 million allocation that is to the department right now? The latter question, I think it means that it would be duplicative, at least as currently written.
Yep.
And the way I think of it is if there's an entity like VHFA providing the financing, what happens is, say there's a $10,000 project, Efficiency Vermont incentives buy that down to $5,000, as you're discussing earlier in the hearing. Then the lender, like VHFA, is then providing the capital for that other $5,000, and it's paid back through the bill. And in that mechanism, there's options. The utility could be the interface that's actually lending the money. I think that goes into some of the issues I just discussed, or
Yeah.
it could be something like Efficiency Vermont pays the contract, or somebody else. Is it EE utility program? I'm not sure the details. So,
Right.
but if the utility is really the administrative tool that kind of passes through the billing, then I think that's a really critical, but it's a smaller role than might folks may have otherwise been thinking. And so and it creates kind of this a firewall. That's probably a bad term to use, but a break between
Yeah.
the utility responsibilities and the ratepayer obligations, and what they're on the hook for as a whole, in this program. And I think those kind of safeguards could be helpful.
Okay.
So I mentioned all that, and I can't reiterate enough that the conversations seem to continue to be evolving over these 6 weeks, 8 weeks that it's been in front of you all, in part informed by all the good discussions here. But I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, thanks. And I realize I'm looking at the clock. I've been asking too many questions myself, so I'm going to stop asking questions. And I think you had something else you wanted to share with us related to the energy savings fund.
Right. Well, I think I touched on it. I think that the $2 million, as I understand it now, would be largely duplicative. And so if I think the original proposal of the kind of that 952 is still something that is supported, and then also kind of the other original funding to the BGS SEMP and to the Affordable Clean Energy Program, but open to ideas, I suppose. But as it stands now, I don't know what you want us to do with that money. I have ideas, but
All right. Well, so I think honestly, thank you for that. And we realize, and as I was saying, the apparent duplicativeness of it is an artifact of the committee putting that in pretty much almost on the same day that the HFA came to the conclusion that they could offer to the meter or on bill financing as part of their strategy. So we're going to continue to explore ideas. Maybe we go back to something close to where we started, or maybe there's another piece of the puzzle that some portion of money gets applied to. I know that Senator Perchlik has talked to me about some ideas, and we're trying to schedule them into committee to hear about, for instance, advanced wood heat, which has had Clean Energy Development Fund money, and those dollars are declining. So is that a worthwhile adjunct to the program? Who knows? It's a little off topic from weatherization, but it's on topic for carbon reduction. So we'll continue to keep working, and I'll plan to stay in touch with you. So in addition to committee time, you and I can continue to talk and try to make more progress between committee visits as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, so I'd like to check in, thank you, Mr. Poor, to Mr. Castengay. Good morning. You've heard the conversation so far. We're just testing the waters to see if the current conversation sounds like something of interest to Green Mountain Power, or what your take is on what we're exploring still.
Great, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having me. For the record, I'm Josh Castengay, Vice President, Chief Innovation Officer at Green Mountain Power. So the good news is I don't have to reiterate a ton of what Ms. Bailey said, and Mr. Poor, I think in the same vein as what Ms. Bailey talked about, we continue to be supportive and welcome the opportunity to figure out ways to help make it simpler for customers to do this kind of work, and the idea of using the bill as a mechanism and potentially to the meter to flow through funding from a source like VHFA or other incentives makes sense, and something that we want to continue to work on. I think Mr. Poor touched on it. We have a tariff today. We have a tariff that it was developed around the idea of making our bill sort of open to folks, any lending institutions or anybody that wanted to do energy type services, lending to customers as a mechanism to pass through. So essentially taking advantage of the bill that's already going to the customer, the billing system. It's not necessarily set up today to be like a to the meter. It's more designed around there's a customer either taking a loan through another party, and this is flowing through. But as Mr. Poor mentioned, we think that kind of structure could be adjusted to meet the need of doing something like a to the meter approach. So using an existing tariff as a template and building off of that is a possibility. And then the source of funding, whether again being like a VHFA loan or that coupled with incentives to help drive down those project costs for customers, could be an interesting way to continue to drive this work. So yeah, I think in short, the previous folks that testified really hit where we are at as well, which is we continue to work. We think partnerships will be really important in terms of delivering the services themselves, working with customers, but leveraging the billing system as a tool and going to the meter versus to the individual will likely open up more projects and more folks who can do that work. So I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Sure. I just have one quick question, and that is there anything that we should be aware of that GMP as an investor-owned utility would be different than the munis or co-ops in terms of how you would look at or have to look at such a project?
I really don't think so, because at the end of the day, we're all regulated in the same fashion under the Public Utilities Commission, and work with the department as we look at these kinds of pilots and programs and projects. So from a tariff standpoint, I know Mr. Nauer will be testifying to this a little bit. He may have thoughts there, but I think it's pretty similar in that sense that we're under the same type of regulation. So offering these kinds of things to customers should be pretty similar across the DUs.
Okay, great. Any questions for Mr. Castanet? Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'd like to turn to Mr. Nauer. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
So you're batting cleanup here. You've heard all the conversation, and welcome your comments on anything you've already heard or PUC perspectives on all of this. So the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, again, Tom Nauer. I'm the policy director at the Public Utility Commission. I don't have any prepared remarks. I have heard the previous three witnesses' testimony, and I don't disagree with anything that they have said. And I would just say, from the PUC's perspective, going back, several months to the Act 62 report, the PUC identified, funding is what is needed to move this forward. And I know that this committee has been working on this for the last couple of months, and so you're well aware. And so I think exploring the concept of to the meter financing is really well worth the effort. So the prior witnesses have covered this territory very well, and I view my presence here today as, if the committee has any questions that I can answer from the PUC's perspective.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let me just check the committee. I don't see any hands. I do just want to check in. So Mr. Poor was pointing out that he felt like that the statutory authority for a to the meter program, for instance, already exists, and that what would be required is for a utility to bring forward a tariff proposal to the PUC. Does that coincide with your read on, from the legal side of things, what would need to happen to enable us to implement?
Well, I'll caveat my answer. You're asking for a legal opinion, and I am not a lawyer. But as someone who has worked in this sector for 11 years at the PUC, I can tell you, GMP has, as Josh just said, they've got a tariff that is kind of similar, but not exactly, a to the meter program. And I know that, if you look at section 225 of Title 30, that I'm going to paraphrase here. If a regulated public utility is offering a service to its customers and it is charging money for that service, then it is required by law to file a tariff.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I don't see any hands up. Well, great. Well, thank you to all four of our witnesses this morning. It's really been helpful to revisit Onbill and to the meter, clarify precisely what they aren't, and have a better sense of the work in order to continue our to get closer to implementing such a thing. So, so far, I'll just speak personally. So far, it's all encouraging to me, and sounds like we have willing and interested parties. The question is working out the mechanics and legal details for finding the money, managing connects, disconnects, who's paid first, second, et cetera, et cetera. But those all seem like manageable things to work out. The exciting thing to me is the fact that perhaps we're on the verge of finding a new tool to help Vermont really fund a meaningful portion of the big increase in weatherization that we'd like to do in the next decade. So not the only tool, but maybe a tool that addresses part of the program. All right. Well, with that, that concludes our work this morning on S109. We're going to change gears a couple times in the remaining hour plus that we have, and that is we're going to be revisiting S102, the compost bill. So we've had ongoing conversations, and I followed up with Mr. O'Grady outside of committee yesterday and asked him to redraft the amendment we've been looking at. And similarly, I followed up with him around S101, the sewer and potable water connections provisions that are in sections 10 and 11 of S101. So he'll be in at 10 on compost and back at 11 on water connections. So right now we have a minute until Mr. O'Grady arrives. And then in the middle, we're pausing at 10:30 to hear from folks down in Bennington, because there is the Agency of Natural Resources plans to reclassify groundwater in portions of the town of Bennington because of the discovery of PFAS in that groundwater. There are residents down there concerned about what does that mean for them in terms of property values or ability to drill a well and or replace a well. So we will hear from the DEC as well as two residents of Bennington.
Mr. Chair, if I could just give you a heads up, because we're on the floor at 11, Senate Ed does have a bunch of bills, so I do need to leave at 11.
I don't know if I'm hoping that we're not on the floor at 11.
Oh, I apologize if my schedule is wrong. I am looking off the Senate Education, so I do apologize.
No worries. Other than, well, we've been changing it enough, so it is a little tricky keeping track of the changing window every single day.
I'll just confirm right now that we're not.
I think we may be on at 12, but
That would be,
don't quote me. I was actually concentrating on when we had witnesses in.
no, we are actually on.
The calendar says 11.
We are on at 11, and so Senate Ed, I know I need to be there.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So
That's a problem for us because. I
yeah,
guess-
can you ask, well, Michael's not here yet, so let's
I'm
just
asking-
move. We'll take care of both amendments in one O'Grady visit. And then we'll do Bennington second, and that will finish us before 11.
But he's not here yet. I've emailed him and said, we're waiting for you.
Okay,
I don't know what to say.
all right.
Yeah, I did
So-
email everybody the copy of 102 amendment that he finished.
Okay. And I know he has, I've seen a draft of 101 this morning. It hadn't made it through the editing team.
Senator Bray,
So-
could you send Michael the link?
Sure, I
For the
can do
Zoom.
that right now. Easy. Okay, all done. So so Mr. O'Grady is probably going to be here in a minute or so. Any other committee sort of housekeeping details? Senator McCormick, I don't know if you've connected with the Senate Secretary to get the calendar corrected, since you're the reporter, not me. All set there. Okay, great. All right, and here's Mr. O'Grady. So, Mr. O'Grady, because of the changing floor schedule, we'd like to propose doing both S101 and S102, if you have them both, in this one visit. Is that something you can do? Okay, so let's start with 102, the compost bill. And you are still muted.
Are you asking me to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, hold on a second. I need to.
Thank you for turning around 2 amendments since yesterday on behalf of the committee.
Just 1 second. I've been having computer problems this morning. My network was down and I didn't have a connection to DM and other things.
You're not alone in computer woes this morning.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now.
Great, we can see it.
Hold on a second. Okay. So this, can you see the amendment?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an amendment to S102, the first portion of S102 related to the definition of farming and the Agency of Agriculture's adoption of rules for the regulation of the importation of food residuals for farming. There is a directive to the agency that they adopt rules. And in that directive, 6 VSA section 5133, you are adding a new subdivision 3 that would require the rules to prohibit a farm from initiating the production of compost on or after July 1, 2021 within a downtown, village center, new town center, neighborhood development area, or growth center designated under 24 VSA Chapter 76A.
Okay, great.
You would also require the rules to be designed to reduce odor, noise vectors, and other nuisance conditions on farms and to protect the public health and the environment in a manner that is equal to or better than the rules for compost facilities in A&R's solid waste management rules as amended. This was intended to replace the as stringent as proposal from the previous draft of the amendment. So this gives the Agency of Ag some flexibility in providing measures that still meet the outcomes of reducing odor, noise factors, and other nuisance conditions and protecting public health and the environment.
Great, thank you. And let me just pause. Any committee questions on either of these so far? All right. Thank you, Mr. O'Grady.
Then there is a current report from the Agency for Agriculture to the General Assembly regarding the rulemaking on importation of food residuals, but you wanted it to be a little bit more about the implementation of those rules as well. So on or before January 15, 2022 and annually thereafter, Secretary of Ag reports to the General Assembly regarding implementation of food residuals for composting under the new 6001-22H. The report includes an inventory of the operators that are producing compost under 22H, including the estimated volume of food residuals imported onto farms, a status report on the rulemaking and any subsequent amendment to those rules, an accounting of any complaints regarding or enforcement actions brought against a farm producing compost under 22H, and any additional information the Secretary determines relevant in the administration of compost production under 22H.
Great, thank you.
And then going to the third instance of amendment, you wanted there to be basically timeline for the rulemaking. So a new section was added. The Secretary of Ag shall initiate rulemaking under 5133 for food residual importation on or before January 1, 2022. And then they shall file that final proposal of a rule with the Secretary of State under 3 VSA 841 on or before January 1, 2023. And then you get the fourth instance of amendment, which is the effective dates. I had to tweak that subdivision 11A because of adding the 8A requirement for rulemaking. So this section in Section 1 through 8A take effect on passage. All other sections, including the registration of soil amendments, plant amendments, biostimulants, etc., goes into effect on July 1, 2021.
Great, thank you very much. Any committee questions for Mr. O'Grady on the amendments? Are people satisfied we landed in the right place on the issues we discussed?
We are setting out to make sure that it's downtowns and going down and village expansion areas are not part of where this will take place. Is that correct?
Right now, under the A&R solid waste rules, composting facilities can't be located in designated downtowns, village centers, neighborhood areas. I don't believe it prohibits siting in a growth center. This would prohibit these farms from siting in a growth center, which I believe was your intent.
Okay, so they've been added on to what is currently not permitted but this bill restates that what is currently not permitted is in fact not permitted and adds in the growth centers. Is that correct?
Yes, and because it's a new regulatory authority with new rules, you wanted that standard to be the same, but you are expanding it to a degree.
So you don't need to tell us about moving to the nuisance because we've just preempted it by not by preventing nuisances to be future created in the future. And the other question I had, Mr. Chair, was about effective date. I think the effective date becomes less important now that we have resolved this issue about growth centers. But why wouldn't it be effective from passage rather than kind of saying ollie and free? You have 32 days to jump on this before you're regulated.
So it is effective on passage.
Thank you. Okay, I missed that. Better pay better attention next time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. So one thing, Mr. O'Grady, is we don't have possession of the bill. So the lead-in language on one, like we would offer this, am I correct? We need to switch over to offering it as individual senators?
Yes, that's mine. I did that with 101 as well. So that's my error.
Okay, well, no worries there. So let me just check. Does everyone in the committee want to be on the amendment?
Yes,
so how about
I do.
Okay, myself, Sarah McCormick. Yes, okay. Senator Westman.
That was a yes.
Okay. Senator Yesman, yay or nay?
Is everybody going to be on it?
Senator Campion, are you a yes?
I'm a yes.
Yes, okay. So 4
right.
so far.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so in
So-
essence,
So just to be clear, it bans the downtown, it calls for a report, and it set time limits for rulemaking.
yes,
Right, and it requires that the rules be effectively as protective of natural resources, public health, and public nuisance conditions as A&R's rules.
but gives them some latitude. So that was
Yeah.
one of the things we really heard last year was we're going to make as fine a product, as safe a product, but let us do it in our own way. So it's like, okay, we're concentrating the outcome, not how you get to the outcome. And I think to me, it feels like we're sort of finessing that. Okay, great.
Senator Bray, have you touched base, just out of curiosity, with the chair on this?
I've been keeping him apprised that we're working on this. And once we settled, now I will share it with him and probably go to that committee and explain why we're offering it, that kind of thing, committee visit. Thank you.
So I have one question. Who do you want listed first on the amendment?
Let's just do it. Well, I was going to say do it alphabetically, but that sounds suspicious because I'm a B.
Yeah, but you're first. You should be first.
So let's just do it alphabetically. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator McDonald, you're reporting. Do you want to report the amendment as well as the bill?
I will do that, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
you want Senator McDonald to be listed first.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll do.
Okay, great. All right.
We're
Thanks
going
so
to
much.
stop sharing.
And now I hope we have just as smooth sailing on S101.
Okay, now I will
And-
start sharing.
And I need to take that to the up to the Senate office as on behalf of the proposers of the amendment. And Jude will make sure that I have a copy. And so I'm all set, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I need to change the lead in. I will do that once I have an opportunity. And actually, I did not have the committee do the amendment here. I have Senator Bray. So this is S-101, the committee bill from Economic Development regarding promoting housing choice in smart growth areas. And there is a section 11 in that bill regarding authorizing municipalities to authorize the connection to sanitary sewer and water lines. You wanted to clarify some provisions in that language. There is a requirement that municipalities conducting or issuing these authorizations require documentation in the land records that the connection authorized by the municipality was installed in accordance with the technical standards. The first instance of the amendment clarifies that that documentation has to be issued by a professional engineer or licensed designer that is filed in the land records. And that is being proposed because right now, connections under A&R's rules, potable water supply and wastewater system rules, they have to be approved by an engineer or licensed designer. So I think the intent was to maintain that same professional standard for determining compliance with the rules.
Right. Thank you. Right. So, the concern I heard in committee, and I shared it, was it's fine if they're authorizing at the town level the connection, but we don't want the work to be any less professionally rigorous. So this takes the exact same requirement that A&R would apply to determining how to make that connection appropriately and applies it to whomever documents the connection at the municipal level. Okay.
Should I move on?
Yes, please. We
The
can always
second
come
is-
back if.
Okay. The second instance of amendment is really just a technical amendment. The language throughout uses the term authorization, except for in subsection B, it says the registration. It says the municipality shall notify the secretary 30 days in advance of terminating any registration. There's no registration required elsewhere in the language. It's authorization. This is just a amendment to maintain consistency in terms. And then the third instance of amendment would add a new subsection that would give a municipality discretion. It's not mandatory. It would say municipality issuing an authorization may require the person to whom the authorization is issued to post notice of the authorization as part of notice required for a building permit under 4449 or other bylaw authorized by the zoning and bylaw chapter in 24 VSA chapter 115.
And so, Senator McDonald, this went towards your concern that you expressed that people may not be, some of these proposed connections might be less visible to others. So just like we're all used to seeing a building permit posted, one possible strategy to increase visibility would be to be posting this notice as specified here. I do have a question, Mr. O'Grady. When you were drafting this, you used a may instead of a shall. So I know you did that intentionally. What was the thinking about choosing one versus the other?
Your request for the amendment used may.
Yep. Okay. Well, that will be, sorry, I didn't know how I said it. So any committee questions on that?
So, Mr.
It
Chair, that
would seem-
basically, Mr. Chair,
Yep, Senator
so
McConnell.
so basically, these amendments sort of put into the bill and make it clear that about what is actually taking place in the grander scheme of things, in which we're in the uncomfortable position as a state and citizens of plugging more waste system into plants that are not permitted and are not capable of keeping sewage out of the rivers.
Right.
Without being as detailed as I just was.
All of the plants are permitted.
So if your license is expired, then what's the difference between being permitted and your license having expired, and what are we missing here?
There's something called administrative permit extension. So as long as they've applied for their permit before the deadline, they can continue to operate while the agency works through the conditions for their final permit. So they're still technically permitted.
Yeah. So my driver's license expired how many years ago, and I'm still driving, and I haven't gotten it reissued. How does that work?
Well, the agency has a responsibility to issue that permit. But if you're talking about the CSOs are also subject to a rule that requires a schedule for implementation and fixing.
Yeah.
And you should also know that the ARPA funds, the federal stimulus funds, has a significant amount of money in it that would be available at the state level and at the municipal level for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So we're trying to figure out if that could be used for CSO fixing. So the timeline for fixing CSOs may actually be accelerated if this money is available for that purpose.
Mr. O'Grady, everything you say is comforting and true, but it kind of sidesteps what we as a legislature and our government has been failing to do here for the last couple of decades. And
Sure.
I don't want to say it's been papered over, but it just hasn't been, it's sort of been out of sight, out of mind, whether that's vice versa. But okay, so and it's not and it is unfair of us to ask you to defend what we are responsible for. So thank you for thanks for helping. Yeah,
I'm just gonna shut my mouth at this point.
No, it is unfair for us to ask you to do anything else in this situation.
Well, and ideally we would have had, we tried to get the agency in to be with us as we talked about this amendment, to follow up on the testimony we heard yesterday. The earliest we could get the people we needed is tomorrow morning. So we'll be hearing from the agency on the expired permits and other things. So for the amendment itself, I would ask Mr. O'Grady to change the may to a shall, please.
Yeah.
Just makes it clear that we're trying to it will be more transparent and certain. And Then, so because I was making the drafting request, my name's on it. Do other members of the committee want to offer it in essence as we can offer it as individuals? We don't have the bill, so it has to be by individuals. Who would like to be on this amendment to alter the connection requirements of S101, which is currently in finance? So I would want to be on it. Anyone else want to be listed? Okay. So that's fine.
It's the right thing to do, Mr. Chair. We will also be, it'll be annoying to our colleagues that we are making them think about it and having to look at it. I will, as is my habit, if it annoys my colleagues, I will be on the bill.
Okay, all right.
I'm happy to be on as well. Do we need to take so yes, this is just from individuals, so there's no reason for this committee to show endorsement or not. Okay. If I may, you might want to recommend, if I may, or suggest that you get a few others on there before you go in, but perhaps it's too late to do that. Perhaps it'll just come from the three of us.
Well, it's still in finance, so there's a little time. So okay. Michael, if you could hold this one and I will talk. The other thing is I've been keeping Senator Sirotkin, Senator Clarkson, Senator Ballant, reporter all apprised of the fact that we're working on it and what we're working on.
Well, if I may, I met with Senator Starr this morning about some things related to what's in my committee. And one approach you might want to take that I'm hoping to take with Ag is to do joint committee amendments. If that committee is in agreement, it might be easier as you make your way to other committees and to the floor to have Senator Sirotkin's team on there as well.
Okay, well, and that's true then too of the Ag amendment. So I'll reconnect with Senator Starr, who I've been talking to almost daily on this, and see. The only thing that we heard as a concern from them earlier was about the sunset. The other stuff was relatively, I think, acceptable. So for that purpose, then if Mr. O'Grady, if you could hold them both, then I'll reach out to both committees. And thanks for that suggestion, Senator Campion. It is, I don't know why I forgot that. I've done that before. If you go back to the original committee and you get someone like the chair to sign on, it tells the whole room that this is not a hostile amendment.
Well, you haven't been a chair of a committee as long as I have, so I understand why you could.
I know. I'm still trying to find the mention. Okay. Senator McCormick.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm not fully conversant in your language and its impacts. I take it that what you're trying to do is to take these sections and make them less odious. But leaving them in the bill. Because we do have the option, I think, of just deleting them altogether.
Sure. I mean, and any member could move to divide the question and separate those out. Maybe that motion will come up on the floor. My take, having listened to our testimony and conversation in committee, was that the waters of the state question, that we have a responsibility, an ongoing obligation to maintain waters, an obligation to manage them, is not affected by sections 10 and 11, and that management obligation, I'm glad Mr. O'Grady is still with us, is actually manifest in the rules at ANR that still apply, as well as in the NEPDES permit that was issued for the wastewater treatment facility. So the state's obligation is undiminished. What we are authorizing is that the plumbing connections to be made to a city system now can be authorized at the local level, as long as the person who's doing that authorizing is as qualified as is required by current A&R rules. Namely, you must be a PE or a licensed designer.
Well, I'm aware that anyone advocating for state authority here is standing on very weak ground because the state has not exactly performed well in this regard. But nevertheless, this is a shift of authority from the state to the local, to the municipality. And I'm wondering if this is one of the corollaries to Murphy's Law. Once you mess something up, everything you do to make it better makes it worse. I would offer.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have one more day.
Yes.
I will offer the committee an amendment tomorrow. I'm not prepared at this point, but I'll get in touch with Ellen on it, which we've already discussed. I'll have language, but we've already discussed this, which is basically an umbrella permit. This is in effect an exemption from state jurisdiction, and I think better an umbrella permit, which is to say you make it easier for the town to get its Act 250 permit and its A&R permit, but that it still be the state's jurisdiction.
Okay, well, so thank you for sharing that, and of course proceed with whatever feels like the best course.
Yep.
And meanwhile, Mr. O'Grady, if you could send me a version of these two amendments, then I will connect with economic development and agriculture. I'll reconnect with Senator Starr before the floor and ask him, as he has been willing. So I think the 102 is still in finance, so we don't even have to pass over anything. I don't think either is up for action on the floor. So I'll use the next day to circulate the amendments and see if we can make them come from both, in essence, from both committees. Okay.
So when you get a chance, I'd like to say something.
Senator Westman.
Did Michael want to say something?
I was just going to ask Senator McDonald. I thought Senate Finance passed 102 out yesterday afternoon.
Yes, but I think now it's off to, one of the reasons it got hustled a little bit yesterday afternoon was so it could go to approach.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem.
So I just want to be clear about it. I don't really, I don't think we're in any good spot in any of this, in that. But long held, we've encouraged downtown development. And I believe in that. And this breaking up of parcels and land outside of villages has consequences beyond waste and septic. And we're concentrated just on the septic. And the more that you break up large lots and land outside, you have an effect on waters. And anything that encourages more people to build outside of downtown centers, I'd like to discourage. And so as this movement towards trying to get people to build more in downtown centers happens, I realize all of our failings about dealing with municipal septic systems and the whole process of doing that. But if I don't do this, do I encourage development outside of villages? And I don't want to do that. So I'm terribly conflicted about this. And my hope is that we would do better in villages, not only for the septic that goes out in that septic water. But the more that I break up land area and the more trees I cut out in the countryside, the more runoff you're going to have and the worse off we're going to be.
Okay, well, thank you. So thank you everyone for a thoughtful discussion on, sort of the rough and tumble of the last 2 weeks. I think we've arrived, at least for the moment, at a fairly good spot. I will follow up. Mr. O'Grady, when you have those 2 amendments, if you send it to me, I'll go do the presenting to other committees. Mr. O'Grady.
I just want to clarify who should be listed as sponsors of 101 amendment. That I saw Senator Bray, Senator Campion, and Senator McDonald. I believe Senator McCormick's going to offer something different. And Senator Westman, I wasn't clear if you wanted to be listed on the 101 amendment or not.
What, this amendment? I'm
Yeah.
probably voting no.
Okay.
If
I wanted to
that
clarify.
wasn't clear, I'm probably voting no. I want to encourage development in downtowns.
Understood.
Maybe
It's clear to me.
Thank you for asking.
It was clear to me, Senator Westman and what we are all conflicted, and we're trying to spread some of that feeling conflicted around to our colleagues who are driving by blissfully.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I would suggest, Mr. Chair, if you might maybe touch base with the chair of Senate Economic Development and then come back to us and see, with their temperature check, and then we can maybe make adjustments accordingly.
Yeah. So I'll do the circulating. I'll have the bills, the amendments, and I'll report out to the committee tomorrow. Great. And we will also have A&R in tomorrow morning first thing to talk about the testimony we heard yesterday. Thank you very much, everyone. On this, now we have a little tight, but want to check in. We have about 25 minutes to hear about what's going on in Bennington, get an update. There is a filing deadline tomorrow for public comments on the reclassification in Bennington District, Bennington Town. And we just wanted to hear from a couple of citizens down there, as well as from the agency, so we better understand what that redistricting process is all about. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Schmelzer to the committee. Thank you so much for coming in. I think probably the best place I'm going to fess right up. The committee knows very little about the role of this redistricting and how it relates to the previous work and ongoing work in Bennington related to PFAS. So if you could fill us in from the beginning, that would be helpful.
And Mr. Schmelzer and Mr. Chair, if I could just say, this was brought to some of our attentions through a letter / postcard that many constituents in the North Bennington region received. So if that is helpful, Mr. Schmelzer, and if you would let us know the content of that correspondence, that would be great as well.
Okay. I want to thank the chair and the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is John Schmelzer, and I'm one of the project managers that's working on the PFAS response since that started. Senator Campion, yeah, I know you know this well, started about 5 years ago. And we started sampling wells. And then the next thing we know, we've sampled over 600 wells, and over half of those wells had levels above the standards in these wells. And in the last 3 years, we worked with Saint-Gobain and and they were cooperative. We ended up getting a settlement agreement with them that resulted in water lines that there was 480 people that were eligible for getting connected to water lines. And so far we've connected over 365. And that water line work is scheduled to be completed in, probably by the end of the summer. And in that work, what I wasn't sure of is I do have some slides that might be helpful, at least a a graph that shows the area. If the committee believes that could be helpful, I can share my screen to show that. It's Mr. Chair, I defer to you.
Yes, I just want to make sure that we're going to have time to hear from Ms. Perlman too.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And one thing that I wanted to get clarification on is that we have extended the public comment period for the reclassification of the groundwater from tomorrow to April 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
And that was primarily done there was requests from Al and Nancy and some other people requested that we extend that deadline, and we thought that was a good idea because we wanted to make sure that people had the opportunity to be able to weigh in on this. So as part of I'm going to try to share my screen. I haven't done this in Zoom, so hopefully it will work. Can you guys can you see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'll start with is this slide, just to kind of give the big picture of why the groundwater in Bennington is being reclassified to a class 4. And what that means is that we're documenting that there is an area that we know to be contaminated. And in this case specifically, it is PFAS. And that is from the air emissions that came from the 2 former facilities. I'll go to the next slide to kind of that shows the area that's impacted, and that's approximately 20 square miles. And you can see this is where the former ChemFab facility was. This was the major emitter of contamination, but they also had a plant that operated in the 60s and the 70s here, and this plant operated from I think 78 until 2002 2003. And what we found from all the investigation and the sampling of wells that we've done, over 680 wells, that these air emissions have deposited onto the surface of the soils and is leached in the groundwater. And based on the wells that we've sampled, monitoring wells, drinking water wells, it's our conceptual model is that the shallow groundwater, primarily in this area that you're seeing here, is contaminated. I'm going to jump to a slide here that shows this is a summary of the drinking water wells that have been sampled within the area. And the green colors and the light green colors that you're seeing, those are levels. The dark green colors means that the wells that have been sampled have not had any detections of PFAS. And the light green means that, or I guess it's kind of a lime color. That means that there are detections of targeted PFAS, but below the standards of 20 parts per trillion. And then the other colors you've seen show that they're above. And I know one of the concerns that have been expressed at the meetings and through public comment that we've received so far is that there's some wells in there that are green, that are clean. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the groundwater is clean. It means that where those wells tapped into the groundwater are clean. And as part of the remediation, when we looked at the site, our goal was the primary focus was to get people clean water. And what we thought was the best way of doing that was to connect people to town water where we could. But there were certain areas that it just wasn't technically practical to connect folks. And in the settlement agreement that we had with Saint-Gobain, they had areas where they committed to put it in the water lines. And I talked about kind of where we are with that. We're pretty close to being done with that part of it. But there were some areas where it did not make sense to connect for technical and economic reasons. They still have obligations to make sure that we sample the wells that are clean in those areas to make sure that they stay clean. And also wells that are above the standards, they have to maintain a treatment system. And in some cases, we're looking to see if there's alternative long-term remedies that can be put in place, such as replacement wells. But what the major focus was in the first 4 years was to make sure we're getting people clean water. And that's for existing water users. What the purpose of this reclassification does is it documents that there's an area where there is contamination. It specifies that what the criteria would be for new wells. Given how large this area is, 20 square miles, when this discussion by the legislature and also with ANR, when they were trying to figure out reclassification, I don't think there was anyone imagined that we would have an area that was impacted to this scale. So what our purpose of what we're trying to do here is comply with our requirements in rule and statute. And in a rule, it states that if there's contamination that is expected to be in place for over 5 years, and unfortunately, given the nature of this contamination, it doesn't break down, it's persistent. And given the low concentrations that are the standards in the parts per trillion levels, it's going to be a long time before the groundwater is clean. However, we do recognize that there are clean wells that are in this area. And so what we were trying to do is do our best to balance those requirements for the statutory and rule requirements that we had, but also recognizing that we needed to allow drilling in this area. So what this reclassification does is it basically provides guidance to drillers and also to the regional offices when they permit new wells, what the criteria is for drilling new wells. I talked about that in some places, Saint-Gobain has looked at installing, have installed replacement wells in areas. In fact, let's see, can you see my cursor here?
Yes.
Here, just an example where the orange is, that well was, a replacement well was placed at that location. And so far that well has been clean. And getting back to kind of what we think is going on is we think most contamination, definitely the shallow groundwater is contaminated. And in some places, the deeper groundwater is contaminated. But we felt confident in that area that given that there were some clean wells in its vicinity, if we were able to isolate that upper part of the aquifer, that we might have a good chance of finding clean water, which we've had in 6 cases. So the purpose of the getting to Senator Campion's question on the postcards, those postcards were sent as a notice to let people know that we began the formal process of changing the groundwater for statute and rule from water that is essentially is clean to water that it either is contaminated or suspected to be contaminated. And we wanted to put in conditions so in the future, when people put in new wells, that they will not be drinking contaminated water. So that was the driver for the reclassification. I know I jumped around a little bit, but but I know you're short on time. So hopefully that was helpful. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Senator Campion, thank you.
Yes, thank you. 2 things. First for the chair, Mr. Chair, knowing that we are on the floor at 11, I'm wondering if we do get too tight, I do believe this warrants perhaps a longer conversation. I don't want Ms. Perlman to be rushed. So I just want to put that out there. Then Mr. Schmelzer, so what I'm wondering, do I have it correct that you need to do this in order to protect future homeowners from understanding where their water is going to be coming from? Where to drill? Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
No, that was it.
Yeah, it's a formal notification that there is a potential issue here with the groundwater, and it provides a means for the permitting process for people to drill a well, what needs to be done, and what one of the conditions that we have that's included in this reclassification order is well construction requirements that and the purpose of those is to the extent that we potentially can is when they drill the well to separate from that upper aquifer. And to be clear, in some area, in the areas, I'm going to jump to another map here. In the areas that are in that the light purple and the green, there is approximately 32 wells that have treatment systems in those areas. And those are areas that will not be served by town water. So if someone wants to put a new well in those areas, they're allowed to, but they have to meet these well construction requirements. And to be clear, in those areas, Saint-Gobain, if that well is contaminated, Saint-Gobain is obligated to treat their water. And that's part of the consent order. The reason why there was a time, I think before 2018, before there was a statute change, if you reclassified the groundwater, you could not drill any new wells. It was prohibited. But we recognized, given Bennington, that just did not make sense. So we wanted to have a provision that gave us some flexibility, just with the fact that some of these people, the only way they're going to be able to get water is by drilling a well. So again, we're trying to balance. We don't want people drinking dirty water, but we also recognize that there has to be a means for people to get water in these areas. So that was the balance that we're trying to strike with this proposed reclassification.
So thank you, Mr. Schmelzer. Let's move to Ms. Perlman. Again, since you've extended the deadline, this will give us a chance to come back. It just turns out that this is all happening in the middle of a crossover crunch time. So we were slotted into a narrow period of time. If you could unshare the screen and then go to Ms. Perlman, and then
let's see, how do I do that?
When I do screen sharing, there's a little thing at the very top that says unshare.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm still seeing it, but anyway, I'm going to slide reposition. So good morning, Ms. Perlman. Thank you for joining us. Sorry that we're on a.
Chair, I'm wondering, could we please remove the maps, Mr.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
What? No maps, masks?
So, Ms. Perlman, this won't be the only opportunity to speak with us. So could you just give us a Bennington citizen perspective that you want us to have in mind before we can come back to this and spend more time on it?
Certainly, thanks. Bennington homeowners specifically perspective. I want to thank you for allowing me to testify before your committee and clarify that though I don't represent all the homeowners in my area who are similarly impacted, everyone that we've spoken to about this agrees with what I'm going to say. And I also want to offer a really sincere and heartfelt thank you to John and Richard Spies for their really unbelievable work in the years that they've been helping our community with this issue. It's really been gratifying. We live on Settlers Road. We've lived here for over 30 years. It's a neighborhood of two connected dead-end roads right off of Route 7A, just below Route 7, near Shaftesbury and North Bennington. And John's map, we are just to the northeast of ChemFab, 1.65 miles I measured from ChemFab to our home. When we were initially tested for PFAS, some homes in our neighborhood, there are 20 homes in our neighborhood. Some of them had no non-detect, some of them had low, below whatever the state limit was, and others had in a range that needed to be corrected. Those homes were qualified for a POET, which means point of entry treatment water system, to provide us with clean drinking water, which we still have. While Saint-Gobain is currently responsible for the maintenance of these systems, there is not at this point any clear understanding about the future of their responsibility for the maintenance of these POET water filtration or treatment systems. So I just want to be clear that most of us are assuming that at some point we will be responsible for the maintenance of these systems, which are not like your water softener, which we also have. They're not like your mineral, which we also have, water thing. This is a high-tech unit in our home. So currently, as John said, they were very quick to work on this, and we all are considered to have safe drinking water currently. The consent agreement with Saint-Gobain, as John described, did and is extending town water to many impacted homes. In our neighborhood of 20 homes, 3 homes were offered at the top of the road by 7A were offered town water. The rest, 17 homes, have no opportunity to access town water. I just want to be really clear about that. We don't have any access to it. It's not that we turned it down, so that's 17 homes. So we have clean water via the POET system for those of us who need it. But our groundwater will be classified as non-potable. So to us, this is contradictory, okay? If our groundwater is non-potable, then the consent agreement should include providing town water to all homes in the area whose groundwater will be classified as non-potable. We understand, because John and Richard have explained it to us, that there's a difference between groundwater and our deep well water. But we're not scientists. What we're mostly concerned about at this point is not our safety, because that's been cleared. It's what impact this is going to have on our main asset, our homes in the future. John was talking about wells being dug in the future for future building, et cetera. That is great and understandable. But we all in this neighborhood rely on our wells. And if you are a young family buying your first home, which is the most common scenario in our neighborhood, you may already have young children, or you might be planning a family, and you probably don't understand the difference between groundwater and well water. And neither do real estate agents, nor should they be expected to be. So these potential buyers could think, as I sometimes do when I go off the science thread, groundwater is up here, my well is down here. So if I'm not a very well read person, I may think, well, how could the groundwater not leach into my well and therefore contaminate my well? That's just one line of thinking I'm trying to point out. And I'd like you all to think about, if you were that young family, if that was your adult child wanting to buy the house, or you wanting to buy the house, would you feel safe purchasing a home whose property had groundwater that's classified as non-potable? And it's possible you'd say yes, if the property was nice and cheap and it was worth it, because you were going to end up buying drinking water, or you were going to end up maintaining that POET filtration system for the rest of the time that you own the property, which brings me back to the concern about the impact on us economically going forward. Currently in our neighborhood, I'd say we're about half and half, people in our category with empty nests already, and those with children who are still in the home. And so I just wanted to mention that. I know, okay, time's up. So I just want to say that we so far have seen 2 possible solutions that I want to offer. One is for this proposal to just be rejected, which I understand is not possible, or revised. The other is, as I said, that all homes whose groundwater is impacted by the ChemFab Saint-Gobain pollution should be provided with town water. Whoever pays for it should be Saint-Gobain. If enacted as is, this proposal is leaving those of us whose property falls in this category of having wells, but having non-potable groundwater in jeopardy of losing our main asset as we move into our senior years. And we respectfully request that something be done to protect the homeowners who do not have access to town water, yet whose property would be deemed to have non-potable groundwater under this provision. So I rushed right through that. I'm sorry, but we're happy to come
that
back
was-
another time.
That was perfect, and I'm sorry that we are short
Well
of time.
Nancy, do you have written testimony that you can submit?
Yeah, I'll clean up my bullet points here. You have the letter that my husband wrote. Well, we
Yep.
wrote it together. And I'll clean up my bullet points and I can send them to Jude.
That would be great.
Yes,
And then we
please.
can always have you back in, but this is
Yeah.
very helpful in terms of getting us started. And I believe, I just want to make sure the committee, has everyone seen the correspondence? If not, Mr. Schmelzer, I don't know if you have a copy of the postcard that you would just forward that to Jude as well, so everybody
Can.
has. That would be great. And we'll also have Ledge Council take a look at it.
One thing that I want to clarify is that with regards to the obligation of St. Cobain for the treatment system, as long as their water is contaminated, they're obligated to maintain that system.
But our water is not contaminated.
Well, that is true, and with
Yeah.
that, yeah, we could, yes,
Yeah.
that, but
Okay.
for people that do have contaminated water, they're obligated to maintain that system for as long as there's contamination.
So thank you, Mr. Schmelzer and Ms. Perlman, for getting us started on this. We'll reschedule more time. I'm glad to hear that the comment period's been extended.
Yes, thank you.
And Ms. Perlman, when you write to Jude, if you could include a phone number, I'd like to be able to give you a call. That way I can have more of a real discussion with you before we schedule more formal testimony again. Okay.
I have her phone
So-
number, Senator Bray.
Great. So thank you, everyone. We are a little bit overdue on the floor. So thanks to everyone this morning, and we are adjourned for the day. Thank you.
Hope that was helpful.